price you pay to pursue your dreams. Grinding every day to get that dream. Ain't no holding back until you get your shot. One day you're gonna open your eyes and be on top. That's the price you pay to pursue your dreams. Grinding every day to get that dream. Ain't no holding back until you get your shot. One day you're gonna open your eyes and be on top. Been playing this game since I was 10 years of age. I wanted to make my mark ever since my Pop Warner days. When I strapped that helmet, I'm knocking dudes into a blaze. A lockdown corner going all the way through 7th and 8th grade. Entering high school, I'm ready to write another page. Busting my ass and lifting weights. It's a much higher level, but I'm still making plays. No time to party or bask in my glory days. It's college preparatory classes every single day. Living my life with that singular goal. It's the fire inside that makes me whole. Looking in the mirror, my muscles swole. I'm on a mission, and I'm never gonna stop. When the ball's in the air like Sherman, I'm a hawk. And I promise I'll overcome whatever life throws at me. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Ageless Movement Podcast. I'm your co-host, Scott Lohman.
I'm Sang Hornak.
All right. A very serious incident occurred last week in which PGA star Tiger Woods got into an automobile accident in his SUV on Hawthorne early in the morning in Los Angeles. Today we're going to talk about what the implications are of his injuries. We're going to talk about his past injuries and attempt to answer the question, can he make a comeback? So, before we do that, let's go over the details. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our video. We're trying to build a wider audience. When you click the like button, it puts us in the algorithm. All right, so let's go over the details. The Times reported that Woods was traveling northbound on Hawthorne at a rate of speed and lost control of the vehicle before crossing the center divider. It takes everything in me to not talk about losing control of the car. That's another podcast. But I really don't understand how people in modern vehicles that handle on rails lose it like that and end up over center dividers. Okay, so they use the jaws of life to extricate him from the vehicle. You all know this by now. There's a picture of the SUV. I mean, this looks like it fell down a canyon. We all know there were no drugs or alcohol involved in this incident. They're still investigating it. It looks like he just drove so fast he lost control of the vehicle.
So just a couple hours ago, Yahoo News said that they suspect he was asleep behind the wheel.
That explains a lot. It's probably a major cause of accidents, but you know, why is he driving that early then?
He probably has to get to the golf course.
Oh, good Lord, go later. Don't crash into it. Okay, so what are the injuries? Obviously, you heard that he had fractured his leg and his ankle and foot, but we're going to get something specific here from Dr. Anish Mahajan, the Chief of Medical Officer and Interim CEO of Harbor UCLA Medical Center, described Woods' injuries in a statement posted from Woods' official Twitter account. Mr. Woods suffered significant orthopedic injuries to his right lower extremity that were treated during emergency surgery by orthopedic trauma specialists at Harbor UCLA Medical Center, a level 1 trauma center. Comminuted open fractures affecting both the upper and lower portions of the tibia and fibula bones were stabilized by inserting a rod into the tibia. Additional injuries to the bones of the foot and ankle were stabilized with a combination of screws and pins. Trauma to the muscle and soft tissue of the leg required surgical release of the covering of the muscles to relieve pressure due to swelling. Now that sounds brutal. So, if any of you are not familiar with what a tibia and a fibula type fracture are, this is great. This thing comes in so handy.
It does.
Every week we're doing a podcast and we're like, we need an ankle, or a tibia or a fibula. Bam! Here we go.
I used to carry it in my bag to teach class.
Yeah, exactly. So as you can see, the fibula is a non-weight-bearing bone, and the tibia is a weight-bearing bone. Now, the thing about the fibula is I've known plenty of football players that have broken the fibula in the course of a game, were able to finish the game. Then, of course, that night they wake up in a lot of pain. They have to get an x-ray the next day, and lo and behold, broken fibula. Something that's completely fixable, not really a big deal. However, when you break both the tibia and the fibula, now you have no structural support in your lower leg. The other problem with a compound fracture, literally when they break, they poke out of the skin. It's a horrifically gruesome injury. Some of you have seen this. If you are familiar with Joe Theismann, that was the first compound fracture that I ever remember. And ironically, it happened the same time my brother got his compound fracture. And it'll explain a lot, so bear with me here. One day, my brother and I were playing catch at, I guess I shouldn't even say where we were.
No, we shouldn't.
It was a long time ago. But we were on a grass field at a private school. That's all I'm going to say. On a Sunday. We loved throwing the ball around there when I was a kid because it was just he and I. Well, I made a joke about my brother's poor lateral movement and compared him to one of my friends at the time. His name was Joey, who moved about as good as an obese bull. And I told my brother, you look just like Joey. So he got so angry at me, he was determined to run his crossing route even better. He stuck his foot down and pushed hard to his left. And of course, his foot slid out on him because he didn't have cleats on. And I still feel guilty about this to this day. He fractured his tibia and fibula. Good news was it didn't poke out his skin, but it was bad. And it took him a very long time to recover from this because, well, of course, there's mending time. But aside from mending time, how you get around with a broken lower leg like that is just brutal. You know, he was on crutches. It got to a point where he could kind of drag the leg along. But it took a long time, and what we're going to talk about today relates to other podcasts in the sense that we talk about alignment all the time, don't we, Saint?
Yes.
And I have a theory that he wore out his knee partially due to this injury because I think what it did was it messed up his alignment to the point of where he was putting more pressure. If we can get back to this again.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. So what ended up probably happening was when they set the fibula and tibia and got it all back together, there was probably some alignment issues because what happened, if you go above here, obviously the knee is up higher. He wore out his medial meniscus, which is basically the cartilage in your knee and the medial part of your knee. Now, the reason why you don't ever want to wear out the medial cartilage completely, you can't really walk or do anything because you have bone on bone and you're in pain all the time. And lo and behold, he had a partial knee replacement. And I'm happy to say, this was about 2 years ago, and I'm happy to say he's made a complete recovery, can squat again, can crawl on his knees if he needs to. He's doing well.
But besides alignment, there should be rotation that happens here that my model does not show.
You are correct. And I think that's one of the things that no one knew about back in the early 80s when he broke this. Nobody worked on, well, nobody actually, no one actually knew about tibial rotation. I mean, I'm sure some people did, but most athletic trainers, most trainers, nobody really talked about tibial rotation because this is a big function for the knee itself. So all that means is the lower part of the leg, just below the knee, the tibia and fibula go all the way up, and you want to have a little bit of tibial rotation there. That's the bigger bone in the lower leg. Not a lot. People end up tearing their meniscus because their tibia rotates too much, but you do want to have a little bit of tibial rotation there. It makes the knee function better, makes you move better. And I think what we need to do before we get into what Tiger Woods has to do from here on out, obviously he just needs to recover from the surgery at first, get the swelling down. But once he's able to bear weight again, how long is this going to take this process? And not only that, how long, but what is it going to take for him to possibly compete again on the PGA Tour as an elite golfer? Because as you know, you have to be able to rotate in your spine. I imagine you need quite a bit of tibial rotation when you're attempting your driver swing. So there's a lot to that. I wouldn't say either one of us are experts in golf, but we do understand rotational sports because we've listened to Coach Glass from Canada talk about it quite a bit. And he's the foremost, most respected, I would say, trainer with rotational athletes, which includes baseball players, even tennis to a large degree, and baseball.
He started off as a snowboarder.
Golf, and golf.
So
yeah, he worked with snowboarders. I remember him talking about that.
He himself started as a snowboarder and then just used all those mechanics. They just crossed over into all of those sports that were rotation-based.
Yeah, and he really does know a lot about that. And I wish I had actually heard his talk in the early or the mid-2000s, because I worked with a lot of golfers during that time in my classes that are older men that, enjoyed golf, and I definitely got them stronger. But one thing that they did complain about is they got stronger, they lost some of their accuracy on their driver. And I remember scratching my head at the time going, well, why is that? Now I know why, because we didn't work on rotation the opposite direction. See, the problem with rotational sports is you're always swinging the same way. You swing the same way in golf, baseball, unless you're a switch hitter, you switch and rotate the same direction. Pitchers, same thing. So in other sports, you don't really have these issues. Basketball, you have to rotate different directions. Football, same way. However, if you are a quarterback, you do rotate, you do throw with the same arm. So there are some repetitive movement injuries that happen to quarterbacks. But generally speaking, most positions on a football field, aside from a kicker and a punter, they're not really just repetitive movements in one direction. They're all different directions. Okay, so I think before we get into, the challenges of what lay ahead for Tiger Woods' rehab, I think we should cover Tiger Woods' rehab history. And it's quite extensive. Okay, take 3. So, Tiger Woods, we're going over Tiger Woods' injuries, and they are extensive. Okay, first up, 1994, that was his first surgery to remove 2 benign tumors in scar tissue in his knee, left knee. Which is weird. He's pretty young to have benign tumors at that age, but I've heard of several people that have had that procedure done.
But is that from just where?
I don't know. I mean, he'd only been golfing. He was fresh out of college during that time. In fact, he might have been on the farm at that time golfing when he got those injuries, because that's still mid-90s. So in 2002, he had to have his knee basically drained just outside the ACL, which is your anterior cruciate ligament, which just protects anterior displacement of the knee. And of course, there were benign cysts in that left knee again, and he missed the opener in 2003. Interesting that cysts and tumors were a commonality in his knee, in his left knee.
That's why I mean, for me, I think it's like it has to do with weight bearing, because a lot of people, like I have a golfer and I also have somebody with scoliosis, severe scoliosis, that they do have those cysts.
Yeah, that's interesting. Could have to do with alignment and weight bearing. Okay, 2007, he ruptures his ACL, which is blowing out your knee essentially. Not as bad as mine, I might add. The ACL, so what they do for ACLs is pretty simple. Well, not simple, but what they do is because ligaments are not vascular and they don't stretch like tendons, what they basically do is they just get rid of it. They pull it out and discard it because it's useless from there on out. And they get a cadaver ligament that's nice and taut, and they put it in there. And they even take a part of your patellar tendon. They do that for the younger athletes as well, which I think is kind of a little bit nerve-wracking because you want your patellar tendon as strong as it could be. And that's how they basically rebuild your ACL. And you can make a complete recovery from that. Then in 2008, and this is the thing, he was just running on the golf course, which I don't really know exactly what that means. Was he jogging? Was he sprinting? Was he working on lateral movement? Did he step in a ditch? Like, what happened that caused him to tear? You should not tear an ACL jogging. That's crazy. Okay, 2008. Now we're moving almost a year later. 2 days after the Masters, he needs arthroscopic surgery to repair cartilage, which I'm assuming is meniscus since it's the knee. So he probably had some floating meniscus, probably medial. And here we are, gosh, a month later, and this is what's crazy. So tibia and fibula fractures are not something new to him. Advised weeks before the US Open that he has 2 stress fractures. So what that basically means is there's cracks in it. It hasn't actually broken yet. And should rest for 6 weeks. The first 3 on crutches. So there you go. He did fracture, and that's on the left leg, not the right leg, which is what he demolished in the car accident. So June 24th, 2008, 8 days after winning the US Open, has surgery to repair the ACL in his left knee by using a tendon from his... So this guy's injured his ACL twice. Wow. So using a tendon from his right thigh. So I can tell you right now, that was probably the quad tendon that they used, part of it, which again is kind of scary because you need that quad tendon for stability in the knee. Okay, additional cartilage damage was repaired, meaning meniscus, I assume, misses the rest of the season and does not return until Match Play Championship at the end of 2009. I know, bear with me, this is taking a while. Okay. And here, 2008 was a brutal year for Tiger Woods. It was a great year for me in training, but it was a bad year for Tiger. 8 days after winning US Open, yeah, we already covered that. I'm still stuck in 2008 here. So then he injures his Achilles tendon in his right leg. Now we're moving on to the right leg. And as he was running on a golf course. I got a suggestion for Tiger. Stop running on the golf course. Your mechanics are bad, something's wrong, you are horrifically injuring yourself with running.
Just looking at this picture, he's knee dominant.
True, he's not hinging properly there. But they talk about that was a weird stance he got into, which is a little bit down here. Okay, so he has an injured Achilles tendon. Now, that probably means a minor tear. Obviously, it wasn't a rupture because that's a brutal injury that takes the better part of a year to recover from. 8 months, I would imagine. Okay, 2009, now we're about a year later almost. Hospitalized overnight with a sore neck and a cut lip because he ran over a fire hydrant and hit a tree. Right? So, I don't know, maybe he should have hired a driver a long time ago. This guy, is he falling asleep at the wheel all the time? Is this normal? Does he not sleep well at night? I mean, this is serious stuff. He could have been dead back then. Okay, now, sore neck. So this was probably the beginning of his alignment issues in his spine. And no doubt he probably facilitated this by hitting a fire hydrant in a tree. So you want to protect your spine? Don't hit a fire hydrant in a tree. Okay, 2010. He withdrew from the final round of the Players' Championship citing a bulging disc. Now we're into full alignment issues here. What is a bulging disc? Well, usually when the fluid in the spine drains out, and it basically what happens is your vertebrae need to have space between them. It's called facet space. When you lose that fluidity inside the vertebrae itself, what happens is it gets too close and they touch, or they push out a little and it's misaligned. They used to call that a slip disc back in the day. Essentially, you impinge nerves, it's bad news. Wow, we're 20 minutes in and we're still talking about his injury history. Okay, April 10th, 2011, his left Achilles tendon. Hitting from an awkward stance right here, like you just observed, below Eisenhower's tree, Ike's tree, on the 17th at Augusta National. Withdraws from the Wells Fargo Championship. Okay, we're getting into later in 2011. Diagnosed with an MCL sprain in his left knee. Now that's the medial collateral ligament. So imagine this is your knee. He's already torn his ACL. Now he tore his MCL. Now the good news about tearing an MCL is it does have some vascularity, and for most people, they can heal on their own from an MCL tear. Where are we? Yeah, so now we're moving on to 2012. Achilles tendon. Left Achilles tendon's tight, so he has to withdraw from the championship. Now we move to August 2012. Has to drop out again at Barclays because he feels really stiff. So he's smart here. He's realizing that his lower leg and back is hurting, so he stops. This is good because it prevents him from getting a severe injury. Now we move on to 2013. He's shaking his left arm. Now he's experiencing pain in his elbow. That's pretty common. Golfer's elbow, I've gotten that, and I don't even play golf. I've gotten it twice, actually. Okay, tightness in his back in 2013. August 21st, chips and putts and collapses in pain because of a stiff neck and back pain. Now, I can tell you right now, those spasms are most likely the result of nerve function from his spine. He complains about a soft bed. You think with his amount of money, he would just, I don't know, be able to get a better mattress at a hotel? Stiffer one? Same thing in 2014, where a year later, we're back pain, back spasms. March 9th, 2014, more lower back pain. But he does score a 78, which is the highest score of his career in a final round. I don't even know what that means. I'm so bad with golf. I have no idea what a good golf score is. And then, of course, shortly after that, in March of 14, he has surgery for a pinched nerve in Utah. Okay, so there you go. Now we're dealing with all the back surgeries. So he's gone till the summer, and then a year later, he has to get a second micro discectomy surgery 2 days earlier to remove a disc fragment that was pinching his nerve. So now he's experiencing degenerative disc conditions. They didn't say which vertebrae it is, if it's lumbar or thoracic. I'm guessing it's one of those two, probably not cervical, since in golf that's what you tend to move more. October of 2015, Tiger Woods has a procedure to relieve discomfort in his back. So that sounds like stenosis. Might have gotten a laminectomy there. And for those of you that don't know what stenosis is, basically what happens is when your vertebrae, there should be space inside of the vertebrae itself. When it starts to narrow because you don't have as much fluid in there, the nerves start to get touched. You get a lot of discomfort, you get a lot of nerve pain. So what they do is they go in, I think they do it behind where the spinous process is, and they open it up just a little like that. And what that does is that creates more space in the vertebrae, so the nerves aren't being impinged. All right, August, where are we? Yeah, now August, okay, we're 2 years later now. April 20th, 2017, he gets his fourth back surgery. It's a success, but look, they fused vertebrae. I'm guessing that was lumbar because you could not play golf with fused thoracic vertebrae. There'd be like very little rotation there if that was the case. And then we're looking at March 4th, 2019. He's got a neck strain. And then it ends here because this is an older article. And as we know from the previous article that reports his crash, he had a back surgery, a fifth back surgery in December of 2020. Okay, here we go. What does Tiger Woods have to do now to get back on the golf course and playing at a high level? So, where do we even start with Tiger? So, I feel like I'd be more confident in his returning if he didn't have that tremendous injury history. And we're not just talking knee. We're not just talking fracture in the tibia and fibula. We're talking about major back issues, degenerative vertebrae conditions, stenosis. I mean, and I get it. Look, if all of us get an MRI, I guarantee you, in fact, your best friend had the best saying, you are not your MRI. I know what that means. I'm going to explain what that means. Everyone's MRI is going to show wear and tear. It's just part of being a human being.
Everything ages.
Everything ages.
Part of the aging process.
It's part of the aging process. We all have a certain amount of degenerative arthritis. We all have a certain amount of, some type of degeneration of the vertebrae. But for most of us, we're not symptomatic. We have a good enough musculature surrounding it to where it's not an issue. We function well. Many of us function at a high level, like you and me. But in Tiger's case, he's symptomatic. He has to have multiple surgeries. They have to open up his vertebrae. They have to fuse his vertebrae. And usually they only do that for older people that aren't active anymore. And this is a guy that's a pro elite athlete. So I'm a little bit pessimistic. How about you?
Oh, definitely.
Because I don't think the injuries he sustained from the SUV are the only things that he has to contend with from here on out.
Yeah, so basically, if your spine cannot rotate and he plays a rotational sport,
that's not so good, huh?
No.
It's like if you're a quarterback and you can't really externally rotate your shoulder, you're gonna have a hard time throwing a ball.
Yeah. I mean, like I have a couple golfers that I work mobility with, and even who I've been told is the best player at the country club, I can tell like he doesn't have the best rotation. So it always makes me wonder, where does he get his rotation from? So that's the thing. If your spine isn't mobile enough, like which parts are you going to try to get it? Are you going to try to get it just because you can fling your head around? Are you going to get it because you can throw your arm into it?
Mm-hmm.
Or, yes, so you're going to throw your knee into it. Because I guarantee you these men, well, at least the golfers I worked with, did not have good hip mobility, which is why there were certain moves that we did that I could tell right away they did not do well. There was nothing that changed. Their hips didn't hike when they walked. Everything was, they were just, it's like they were walking on one of those.
Yeah, that's the thing. And honestly, half the people I've worked with are like that. Mm-hmm. When they walk, you don't see the hips
There's
doing
no
much. And then even the ribs, right? There mm-hmm. should be a little bit of movement. And I'm a little tight through the ribs myself, but I have more than what we're talking about here. Yeah.
I mean, and even when I teach class IQ, I always ask, can you guys feel what's going on in between your ribs? And it's always silent. So I'm
my ribs? What are you talking about my ribs for?
Yeah, everybody's like, so I'm like, okay, so nobody's can even open on one side, to the other. So if you can't do that, I'm not sure how you're going to be able to rotate on top
Yeah,
of
that's
that.
really tough. So it doesn't look good for Tiger, just on the spine alone.
Yep.
We're not even to the leg yet. And I suppose we should go over one other thing first, because we do want to talk about the different type of fractures. Okay, what is a comminuted open fracture? So basically, that particular type of fracture occurs when the bone is broken into pieces. Now, I didn't even know about this because I've never heard of a break like this. So what they're describing isn't just a crack that's lateral or diagonal and pushes out. They're talking about busted up to where it's several pieces. Like they have to put it back together like it's a puzzle. An open fracture, known as a compound fracture, that's when it sticks out the skin. When it's pierced through the skin. Now, I mentioned this, and the reason why I wanted to talk about the fracture is, and I started this at the beginning of the podcast, I don't know if you remember who Joe Theismann is. He was the first football player I ever saw that suffered from a brutal fracture. And the reason why I told the story about my brother, when I brought my brother home from the hospital that night, I turned on the football game, and it was the Washington Redskins versus the Giants. And guess what happens? About 3 minutes after I turned the TV on for him, and I'm preparing some food for him, Joe Theismann gets sacked, and he suffers a compound fracture. And they showed it at least 5 times on TV. And my brother's like, no, change the channel. Ugh. So yeah, he was the first person I remember. I remember Bryant Young, a 49er, was a great defensive lineman. And I'm bringing his name up because he suffered from a similar thing as well. Ken Norton, I believe, fell on his leg. And what ended up happening was he suffered from staph infection later. And even though he recovered quite well from the fracture and became an all-pro defensive lineman after this as well, he nearly died in the hospital because they had to pump him full of antibiotics. Now, I don't know if, I don't think he got MRSA. I believe it was staph, but staph can be really hard to get rid of. And that's back in that was in the mid-90s when antibiotics were a lot more effective than they are now. Okay, here's the other thing, and this is what they talk about with these, and this is what got back to Brian Young, the reason why I brought him up. Tissue can be exposed due to bacteria in the dirt, in the clothing. The outcome can be a lot worse if the tissues get infected, and that's what they worry about, because in a hospital, it's very easy to get an infection in a hospital. They try to keep it as sanitary as possible. We got to remember, there's a lot of sick people in hospitals. There's a lot of surgeries. There's a lot of different types of bacteria in hospitals. So that's what they worry about. Another quarterback, Alex Smith, a former 49er, who was traded to the Washington Redskins, I believe, when Colin Kaepernick became the starter. Had a good career. He was traded to the Chiefs. Had an excellent career, a couple Pro Bowls for the Chiefs. And then I believe the Chiefs traded him to the Washington Redskins. And it was in 2018, still playing at a very high level, he suffered a compound fracture. And it pierces through the skin. Just remember that. When they say a compound fracture, it means it pushed out through the skin. Just terrifying. It's taken Alex 2 years, but he made a miracle comeback this season. So, will Tiger Woods play again? All right, let's get to the leg. And we'll get this out of it. Well, we'll leave the spine here. So that's the thing, the big question that we're wondering right now is, can Tiger Woods come back? Can he play at a high level? And I can tell you right now, having suffered from a pretty severe injury myself, it's possible in theory. What you have to do is compartmentalize everything. That's what I did. The only thing Tiger should be thinking about right now is sleeping, icing, and eating. And then when he gets the green light to start rehabbing again, then you focus on the little things you can do and what the weekly goal is. And you don't think beyond that, because right now, he probably would just love to be able to walk again. And it's hard to imagine himself at the moment as an elite golfer right now, because this is probably the worst part of his recovery. It's shortly after the surgery. Even though the surgery is a complete success, and they tell you that, there's that recovery period. You're in pain. If you did what I did and you didn't take any pain pills, you're in a really lousy mood. He probably did take the pain pills, but he's probably a bit depressed because those pills can really shape your psyche at the moment. That's another reason why I didn't take anything. Because you can't imagine yourself at a high level. I mean, I know myself before my knee injury, my legs were the strongest they'd ever been in my life. And then boom, I'm disabled. And that's essentially his situation right now. He might have been in the greatest shape of his life. I don't think he was, but let's just say he was, or at least a very elite level of conditioning. Yeah, very competitive. A year ago, won another Masters.
Yep.
Yeah, he went from that level to now he's disabled. So, can he get back? What are your first thoughts on it? I think the surgeons play the biggest role early on, because if they don't get the alignment correct, it's going to make the rehab brutal, because there's going to be consequences. If that alignment's off, it's going to mess with his knee.
Yeah, so for me, it's the whole rotation. I mean, his
Yeah.
foot. So I've talked about it in the past. I always tell my clients this: if you don't interact with the ground very well, it's hard to get strong. And if your foot has gone through that much damage, I'm not really sure how you can even truly be strong, which is why I mentioned when I saw that picture with him under Eisenhower's tree, it was two knee dominant. It didn't look like he knew how to stack himself anyway. So, I mean, even if he makes it out, it doesn't sound like he has great mechanics, which I think is kind of weird, because, I mean, I feel like he works with a lot of good I mean, I've worked with a few of them, like really good trainers, and I think there's a chiro out there too that he works with. They're very good, so I'm not sure where he's getting his mechanics from.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and sometimes you can only teach so much if the body does not like that mechanic for whatever reason, which it looks like based on all that spine stuff, maybe his body does not like those mechanics that have to happen because it's trying to make space for all the nerve stuff that he probably has too. Yeah,
that's a good point. I really think he should work with a really good AIM instructor at this point once he recovers to the point of where he can start rehabbing, because he's going to have to repattern his movements again. And I'm telling you, from experience, from rupturing my patellar tendon, I had to learn to walk again. And when you watch me originally walk, once they took the brace off and just gave me a crutch, you say, oh yeah, Scott's walking again. Scott really wasn't walking again. Scott needed a lot of work on his gait, and he's going to need a lot of work on his gait. And I think a good anatomy and motion instructor is going to repattern his movements. He may want to go see the guy in Britain, the doctor that started the whole thing, right?
Sure, but I mean, we're still talking about the foot, depending on what happened in that repair. Because we actually have somebody in one of our classes who had to have her ankle reconstructed, and I feel like it's only 10 degrees of dorsiflexion and dorsi 10, and then plantar was like 30 or 35 degrees.
What's the normal amount actually?
I don't know the normal, but 30, it doesn't seem
doesn't sound like, I mean, 10% sounds like almost nothing to me.
That's dorsi.
Dorsi, yeah, going down.
No, coming towards you.
But I mean dropping the heels, I mean.
Plantar.
Plantar is when your heel goes up. Dorsi is when your heel goes down. Yeah.
So, like, you need that for follow through.
Yeah.
In the rotation.
That's what I mean. It doesn't sound like she has a lot of dorsiflexion. And how does she get a good heel strike at that point?
She's also the one who complains of a lot of pain.
Okay, there we go.
And her running mechanics are a little, are different.
Yeah.
So that's
what's
tough. Interesting. Yeah. So that's exact. So here you in golf, you're basically trying to exceed the limits of all of your joints, and it already sounds like he's going to have trouble in the ankle.
You know, the scary part is, well, at least it was the right leg. The left leg, he's had 2 tears of his Achilles tendon, it sounds like. Now, not ruptures, just like minor tears.
But that left one is the one that will stay flat. It's the right one that he follows. So then he has to change which direction he swings in. I guess is the other option.
I don't think he will.
So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was the right leg he fractured, and he swings this way.
Right.
So, yeah. Wow. Okay, so the question I think is, what are the doctors going to be able to do for his foot? Are they going to be able to mobilize his foot later with all those pins and screws? Or is it just going to kind of calcify and not move? Because that's a big problem with feet. Feet need to be able to invert, evert, or what they call pronate. Supinate. I mean, you really need a foot to do all these different sort of movements, right? And they're very subtle. They're just little teeny movements, but they're crucial to your overall movement.
So I have one of those clients too. The less mobile your foot is, the fewer positions you can get into.
Yeah.
So for sure, without a mobile foot, you cannot side plank. You cannot roll through all of these bones and joints to transition from one side to the other. So the stiffer your foot is, there are more actions that you cannot do. So my client has, I personally think, from sitting all day, super high arch, and so there's very little rotation that happens all the way down through the metatarsals.
And you see all these movements here? Feet are supposed to be able to do this. See all this
movement?
movement?
And this isn't even a mobile foot.
Yeah, like this is an immobile foot.
Yeah, it's actually a little, it's not super mobile.
See how it's moving like that, back and forth? Your foot should be able to do that. Mm-hmm. And if there's a bunch of pins and screws holding it together, is he going to get this sort of movement out of the foot?
And that's part of the rotation that we were talking about early on, is what's going to happen between the tibia and the fibula. So and if that doesn't happen, then it just messes up your knee. Yeah. And then you have to go find it elsewhere. So if you can't find it down here,
you can't find it there.
You can't find it at the knee. You're going to go try to find it from the hip, and then you try to go find it from the hip. But he clearly already has nerve issues, so that is already at the hip level anyway.
We're talking
then he
lumbar.
Talks about something about the neck.
Mm-hmm.
So now both ends, from the top and the bottom, are both having issues. So it doesn't leave you with much to go find additional movement. So,
Correct. And I think that's going to be the biggest issue in his rehab. The doctors are going to have to find a way to, I guess, secure the bones like they did, but in a way where there's still some movement there. But I think the main concern is, can we get this all back together? What is Tiger going to be able to do to get that movement back? Is there scar tissue that he can break up to get that movement back? Because like you said, if it doesn't come from the foot, we know it's not going to come much from the tibia, because when you fractured it and there's a rod in there, there's not going to be a lot of movement in that tibia.
And you said patellar tendon is probably, or quad tendon is probably where they took some of that. So
they did.
That's not even
they took it for the ACL repair.
So, I mean, that's already whatever percent gone.
Yeah.
Even if it's 10% gone.
Yeah.
It's still not a full tendon.
Yeah, it's pretty scary to think about. So.
Yeah, the only moving joints he has, it sounds like, it will be his shoulder, which he already has golfer's elbow. So.
Well, I'm sure he might have been over that, but.
No, but I'm just saying, there's no other place to get additional rotation.
It's true, and that's the thing. That's where the spine, and this is where I was telling you at the beginning of our analysis of Tiger's injury, is I would be very confident that he could get back on the field, because I know how hard he works, and I know what a great freak athlete he is. But here's the problem. He's got all these spine issues. If he didn't have the spine issues, I'd be very confident. Right now, I'm not so sure. Because he's going to have to do a lot of corrective movement for the spine while he's rehabbing his lower leg. And that's not going to be easy. I mean, I imagine they can do a lot of aqua work with him in the pool to try to strengthen him. It's not a lot of weight bearing. Obviously, he's no weight bearing because the buoyancy of the water prevents that. But once they get him back on land, that's when you have to be able to move correctly. You can't play golf in water. I imagine I could actually compete at that, because you'd be very limited. Everyone would. Yeah, it's crazy. I'm not going to say it's impossible. It could be done. It's like if you talk to my knee surgeon, Dr. Lowry, and said, hey, is Scott going to be able to deadlift over 300 pounds again? He'd say, oh, hell no. Too old, too many injuries, and yet I did it. So it can be done, but the deck is really stacked against him because of his injury, because of his past injuries.
Yeah, and we're not even talking, I think there is a difference between you and him and most people, is that you're when it comes to eating, the purest eater I've ever seen. Yeah. So I don't know many people who don't take medication, don't drink alcohol, only eat, chicken and rice, basically.
Grass-fed beef.
Right? So I don't know anybody who's that good. Yeah. So, I mean, all of that plays a part in it too.
Sure. And that's a big thing that she's talking about. And I knew this myself when I was going through the healing process. I didn't eat much sugar at all during that time, because I knew, what does sugar do? Think about it for a second. Ask yourself this. What does sugar do to your body?
Inflammation.
Yeah, it increases inflammation. And what does excessive inflammation do to your body? It prolongs the amount of time for you to rebuild tissue. And specifically, what does it do to your cells on a cellular level? It creates more free radical damage. What is free radical damage? It's aging. It's a slow fragmenting of your DNA. That's how I explain aging to people. Slow fragmentation of DNA. What does that mean? Well, if you look at your DNA when you're a kid, everything just looks right. But as you get older and you start fragmenting DNA, that's free radical damage, there's some incompletions in that DNA at certain levels, in certain tissues. And how old is Tiger Woods? He must be close to my age.
No, I feel like he's younger.
About 10 years younger than me?
He's younger than me.
Oh, okay, so he's
I'm
still in his...
5, so maybe 10.
So you're in your... All right, so he's probably low 40s?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. Well, he's not a spring chicken. But it doesn't really matter at this point. What really matters is how he's dealing with this. Mm-hmm. If that spine is as problematic as it's been, it's going to make his rehab process even more difficult because now he's limited in so many different areas. But I think it can be done. And he really needs to see some movement specialists when he's deep into his rehabilitation. But I'm confident he can get his strength back. He'll do a lot of aqua exercise, a lot of strength training in the water. But the real, what they call the acid test, so to speak, is when you put him on land. Because you play golf on grass, on ground. Like Sang says, you have to be able to drive into the ground to create power. I mean, he was known as having a great driver. He could just rip a golf ball, just whoosh, great distances. And that's going to be hard to do if he can't push into the ground. And if he can't control movement in the foot or in the lower leg, where's it going to go? Is it the knee going to have to rotate more than it's supposed to? Then he's going to have another ACL or a meniscus issue. MCL.
He already had a lot of knee
which
surgeries.
he already has on the left leg, unfortunately. And like you're saying, that's where a lot of that movement's going to have to come from. So let us know what your thoughts and comments are on this. Now that you know his injury history in a way that where I guess the nightly news isn't going to cover it with the detail that we are or anybody else. What do you think his chances are of recovery based on what we've told you? Can it be done? Will it be done? I probably give him a 40% chance of getting out there and playing at a high level, which isn't really a high percentage, by the way.
No, it's probably going to be years and years.
2 or 3 years before he's able to play, if he can play at a high level.
Yeah. So it will take a good amount of time, and it's not something you can plan out. You're like, well, this year I'll do this. Next year I'll do that. Because the other thing, like I always tell people, is if your nervous system doesn't allow you to do certain moves, there must be a reason why it doesn't like that move.
That's very true.
So we haven't even addressed that because we don't know him personally enough to know these types of things. But that's...
So I'm just going to try to show a picture of Alex Smith's injury. Okay, here we go. I'll try not to gross you out, but if we could find what it looks like. So that's a pretty gruesome looking injury. You can see the massive swelling on his lower leg. Wish we can give you a cleaner image, but Google's really protective of images now. And you can see the lower leg is not supposed to be that big. It's pretty massive. Pretty gruesome, huh? And they were talking about, and this is what I haven't really mentioned thus far. When you get into these situations, you're dealing with vascular damage. And believe it or not, that's the biggest issue. Because if the injury gets to the point where it's so bad that they can't restore circulation to the lower leg, they have to amputate it. And they actually mentioned to him, Alex Smith, in the early part of his recovery, that there is a chance that they might have to amputate his lower leg. And by the grace of God and his hard work, he was willing to overcome it. Now, to me, that would probably freak me out if I was Alex Smith, because he's not a guy who's in his 5th year in the NFL. He's probably, I think his first year was 2006. Let's do the math to that. What is that, 14 years in the NFL? Yeah, if I'm in my 14th year, I think at that point I'm going to be like, it was fun, but I can walk again, I can move again. I'm going to cut my losses right here and retire. Instead, he came back, and I commend him. There's been other injuries like this. Mackenzie Milton, who was a quarterback for UCF, dislocated his knee, nearly lost his lower leg, went through a 3-year recovery. In fact, he's been 3 years in college and hasn't played. He's actually transferring out of UCF, and he's going to play at Florida State and compete for starting quarterback job there this upcoming 2021 season. So it can be done. You can overcome these horrific injuries, but I'll get rid of this. I'm sure you're grossed out by that. But it's a long, long road back. Mackenzie was 3 years into it. Alex Smith was 2 years into it.
When did you say he played?
Mackenzie Milton or Alex Smith played for the Niners.
When did he start?
He first started in 2006 with the Niners. He was the first player in the draft, I believe, that year.
Got it.
And he left the Niners in 2013 when Colin Kaepernick established himself as the starting quarterback. And then he ended up in the Chiefs, had some really good years there, had 2 or 3 all-pro years. And then, he got older, and then the Chiefs drafted Patrick Mahomes. You all know how great that guy is. So he ends up on Washington, and he was a good starter, playing at a high level, horrific injury, and he's back. So that should be inspiration for all of you. We can achieve our fitness goals if these guys can get over horrific injuries. So let us know what your thoughts and comments are on Tiger Woods and what you think his chances are of playing at a high level again. What do you give a percentage to in terms of him returning, or you just having a
I don't, because I just told you. As I always tell people I work with, strength comes from how you interact with the ground. That's one. 2, you have to be mobile enough, and foot mobility is not easy to achieve, as that is why we see a lot of older adults shuffle. There is a loss of foot mobility in order to make all those bones move. So, I mean, I see it every day, how difficult it is. So. Yeah,
well, the good news for him is, he is a freak athlete, but he's a freak athlete that had some weird movement patterns, obviously. And that doesn't work, that doesn't bode well for him. Because if he was a really good mover, aka a Christian McCaffrey-like mover, where you just look at him and every inch of his movement is so efficient, I don't know that Tiger was that type of athlete. He's just really good at getting that ball to go where he wants it to go.
But you can't do that at the expense of your spine and joints.
Yes, I know. And that's where I'm a bit pessimistic, and I don't give him 50% chance of recovering. I give him a 40% chance. But I'm rooting for him. I hope he gets there.
Yeah. I mean, it'll be cool to see him back.
Yeah, I'll be just ecstatic to see him healthy again. I want to see him just be able to walk again. And he needs to hire a driver. Seriously. Bad idea. If you're gonna get in the car half asleep, or you're just not a good driver anyway, like it sounds like he is, just hire someone.
You can afford it.
He can afford it. Go get a fun sports car or whatever, and I guess you can't put all your golf clubs in a sports car. Okay, go get a fast SUV like a Macan or something, and hire a driver, please. It's just astonishing to me that people crash cars, modern cars, when there's no one else around. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you didn't find this too much rambling, but there was a lot of analysis that went into this to explain what he's up against. It seems insurmountable if you really understand what it takes. It's very easy to be a fan of his and say, oh, he'll do it, but you don't really know what it takes till you've had a lot of these injuries and know, which is just any serious injury, and to be able to recover and play at a high level again. That's another thing. It's one thing to be able to walk again and drive a car. It's something else to be able to function in your sport at that level. All right, any other thoughts?
No, other than maybe he should get on Brady's team and
Yes.
hire all of Tom Brady's
True.
people, since he spends $14 million in
True.
in recovery.
But that's an interesting thing you brought up with Brady, because Tom Brady is a great mover. And I'm going to tell you why he's a great mover. Let's be real. He's not the greatest athlete in the world. But he's a phenomenal passer. His brain probably works 20 times as fast as anybody else's. That's why he's able to recognize what the coverage is doing, what the defensive front is doing, and he can get rid of the ball right now when it has to be gotten rid of. And he knows when to give up on plays. How many great quarterbacks have we seen, like Brett Favre, that just will not give up on a play? And what happens sometimes, not all the time, he throws the ball as he's being sacked, and it ends up resulting in a pick six. So Tom, because he wasn't the greatest athlete, he is the greatest contrasting quarterback from Patrick Mahomes, who does all the things wrong you're not supposed to do as a quarterback. You never run to your right and throw to your left. He's the only human being I've ever seen in my life that can do this consistently and complete a pass and not have it end up as an interception going the other way. It's just astonishing. Brady knew he was not that level of an athlete, so he had to make the most out of his movement. He had to become the most efficient mover possible. And I remember, I knew the quarterback coach of his, Tom Martinez, many of you probably do. He coached the CSM Bulldogs for a number of years to many Golden Gate titles. He was a fantastic quarterback himself, and he would always work on Tom Brady's mechanics. Because when Tom was in high school at Sarah, sometimes his accuracy was a little bit sketch. And the main reason is he needed to refine his movements as a passer. And he still has his notes, and anytime he's having a rough game, he'll go in there at halftime, he'll go over his notes. And he has a quarterback coach, a movement specialist working with him on his mechanics. And Tom, yes, if I was Tiger Woods, that's the greatest suggestion ever. Hit up Tom Brady, because he has figured out what you have to do.
He has a book.
He has a book. It's a great book. You bought it, and I've read several parts of it myself. Okay, we're going to end this podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hopefully you enjoyed the content this week. It was a little bit different than what we normally talk about. But sometimes you just got to talk about what's in the headlines, you know?
Well, it was the first question you got asked in the morning.
It was.
It happened. It was hilarious.
True. And I had to give my 30-second analysis of what we're talking about here today. But I didn't know his injury history then until now, until today.
Actually, that's a good point. Like, how this pertains to general population is, like, when you're working with a specialist, you really should know your injury history, because so many times we've had people come in, and it's not until they start moving, they start telling you about different things that happen. And at that point, like, the picture becomes very murky, especially when somebody's already looking at a list and they're like, okay, these are the things I have to do. They've already devised a plan, and then you all of a sudden remember something. And I've even had something where we had to go back to a client's mother and ask what exactly happened here, because one day I asked him to do something and he's like, oh my God, this reminds me of when I was 3. And I'm like, excuse me, what happened when you were 3? And then he couldn't give me an answer, so then we tried asking his mother the answer.
She didn't remember either.
She couldn't remember either, but it was enough that basically tibial rotation probably did not happen, which made sense why joints were wearing out. So, like, everything matters as far as you can go and as deep as hopefully you're willing to give this person everything, because every little trauma counts, even down to the mental things that happen as a result of these injuries.
Yeah, and just so you know, I work on tibial rotation almost every day. 5 days a week. I work on it on the side of my knee injury, because the day I don't have tibial rotation is the day I stress this knee out again.
It will get stuck.
It will get stuck
at all. So either you move it or you lose it, is what we always say. And
I'm constantly working on that, and I will have to work on that the rest of my life. Yeah. Okay, on that note, go hit up Tom Brady. All right? Buy his book. You'll learn a lot.
And write down your injury history.
Yeah, write down your injury history. Always for doctors and trainers, okay?
And PTs.
And your adaptive PE teacher too. Okay? Especially your adaptive PE teacher. My goodness. All right, everyone. Have a great rest of your weekend. We'll see you soon. Bye.